I slapped the Mafia boss in public for disrespecting my friend. He smiled and said, "Finally, someone real." The smell of burnt sugar and stale coffee clung to my uniform. A familiar comfort, and a constant reminder that another Saturday night shift at the daily grind was grinding to its close. My feet ached, a dull throb that had been building since lunchtime. But the tips Ava had handed me after her last table made it all worth it. Ava, my best friend, was clearing the last few glasses from the bar, her normally bright smile looking a little pinched tonight. Her debt to Lorenzo Rossi was a shadow stretching over both our lives, not just hers. Every extra shift I picked up, every dollar I squirreled away, it was all for her. My own dreams of a small, quiet life, where I could make my own choices and not feel like I was always scrambling, felt miles away. But Ava was family, and family came first. "You okay?" I asked, wiping down a sticky tabletop, the synthetic cleaner stinging my nostrils. The restaurant was emptying out, leaving behind a scattering of crumbs and forgotten napkins. Ava sighed, polishing a wine glass with a furious intensity. "Just tired, Lily. Really tired of feeling like I'm walking on eggshells. He called again this morning." She didn't need to say who he was. The name Rossi hung in the air heavy and dark. Said he needed to see me. Tonight. In person. A chill snaked up my spine. Despite the warm, stuffy air of the restaurant, Lorenzo Rossi didn't call people. He sent messages, usually through hulking men in expensive suits. And he certainly didn't meet people in person. Not without a very specific, usually unpleasant reason. My stomach tightened. This wasn't good. Just as I was about to ask for more details, the front door chimed, announcing a late arrival. I glanced up, my heart doing a nervous stutter step. 3 men stood in the doorway, and even from across the room they radiated an undeniable, dangerous energy. 2 were built like brick walls, dressed in sharp, dark suits that probably cost more than my entire apartment's rent. The third, though, was the one who drew every eye. He wasn't just handsome. He was something else entirely. Tall, with a lean, coiled power in his posture, and a face that could have been carved from ancient stone, all sharp angles and unforgiving planes. His hair was slicked back, dark as obsidian, and his tailored suit seemed to ripple with a silent menace. It was Lorenzo Rossi, unmistakable. He scanned the almost empty restaurant, his gaze sweeping over the tables, dismissive and cold, until it landed on Ava. A flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through his expression. Not recognition, but a decision. He started walking towards her, his movements fluid and predatory, like a hunter sizing up his prey. The 2 bodyguards fanned out, creating an impenetrable barrier between him and the rest of the world. Ava dropped the glass she was polishing. It didn't shatter, just bounced off the rubber mat behind the bar with a muffled thud. Her face had gone completely pale, all the color draining away, leaving her freckles stark against her skin. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, or worse, a devil. A wave of protectiveness, hot and fierce, surged through me. My hands clenched around the damp rag. Lorenzo stopped directly in front of Ava, his presence suffocating the air around her. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her, and the sheer disdain in his eyes was a physical blow. It was the kind of look that made you feel like dirt, like you were utterly insignificant, and it boiled my blood. My fear for Ava momentarily eclipsed my own terror. Ava Bianchi. His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly smooth, yet it had an edge of steel. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet restaurant like a knife. "I believe we have an outstanding matter to discuss." Ava swallowed hard, her gaze darting around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. She clasped her hands together, twisting them. "Mr. Rossi, I'm so sorry. I've been trying to get it together. I just need a little more time." Her voice was thin, reedy, barely a whisper. She sounded small, helpless. And that was the thing that finally broke my self-control. I remembered Ava's mother, years ago, working herself to the bone, exploited by a landlord who kept raising the rent. I remembered the helplessness, the way my own mother had fought for her, only to be dismissed. I remembered how powerless I'd felt then, watching injustice happen and being too young, too small, to do anything about it. I wasn't that girl anymore. Lorenzo Rossi chuckled, a sound devoid of humor, dry and rasping. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He didn't open it immediately, instead letting it dangle by a silver cord, just out of Ava's reach. The air crackled with tension, and the scent of expensive cologne, sharp and alien, filled my senses. My knuckles were white. "Time, Miss Bianchi, is a luxury you no longer possess," he said, his eyes, the color of a stormy winter sky, devoid of any warmth. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he opened the pouch and let its contents spill onto the polished surface of the bar. They weren't coins or bills. They were small, glittering stones, perfectly cut diamonds that caught the low light of the restaurant and scattered it into 1,000 tiny sparks. They lay there, a vulgar display, mocking Ava's struggle. "This," he continued, gesturing to the diamonds with a long, elegant finger, "is the value of your debt. In full." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, allowing us all to process the sheer casual wealth he was flaunting. The manager, a beefy man named Frank, had emerged from the back, his face slack with fear, but he wisely kept his distance. Then Lorenzo's lips curved into a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Consider it a severance package, Ava. You're done here. Consider your debt paid. You're free." Ava's head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion, then dawning relief. "Really? But how?" "My generosity has its limits and its demands," he said, his gaze flicking towards me for the barest fraction of a second, before returning to Ava. "You will not work in this city again. Not in any establishment that I or my associates frequent. You will leave, tonight, and you will not contact anyone from your past." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't freeing her. He was exiling her, stripping her of her livelihood, her friends, her entire life, just because she owed him money. He was humiliating her, breaking her, reducing her to nothing. And then, as if to underscore his power, he swept his hand across the bar, sending the glittering diamonds clattering across the floor, scattering them like worthless pebbles. A deep, visceral anger exploded inside me. It wasn't a thought, not a decision. It was an instinct, a raw, burning need to strike back, to defend Ava against this callous display of power, this cruel injustice. This man with his cold eyes and his expensive suit thought he could shatter someone's life and walk away without consequence. My hand flew through the air before my brain even registered the action. The sound was sharp, resonant, a crack that echoed in the sudden, stunned silence of the restaurant. My palm stung, a burning sensation that vibrated up my arm. Lorenzo Rossi's head snapped to the side, his cheekbone reddening almost immediately under the force of the blow. His expensive cologne mingled with the metallic tang of something that felt like ozone in the air. For a split second, a profound, almost supernatural silence fell. Even the two bodyguards froze, their eyes widening in disbelief, their hands hovering near their jackets. My breath hitched, catching somewhere in my throat, a tiny, ragged sound. The world seemed to narrow, all the noise and light receding until only Lorenzo and I existed. His face, which had been so cold, so impassive just moments before, now held an expression I couldn't decipher. Shock, yes, but something else, too. Something intense and unnerving. He turned his head slowly, his gaze, those storm cloud eyes sweeping over my face. It wasn't anger that etched his features, not immediately. It was something far more chilling, an intense, almost analytical curiosity. His eyes held mine, pinning me in place, and I felt a tremor run down my spine, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The stinging in my palm was nothing compared to the sudden, overwhelming realization of what I had just done. I had slapped Lorenzo Rossi. A faint, almost imperceptible smile, utterly devoid of warmth, slowly spread across his lips. It was a predator's smile, chilling me to the bone. He raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and touched his reddened cheek, his fingers brushing over the mark I had left. The movement was so calm, so measured, that it felt infinitely more menacing than if he had roared in fury. The fear, bone-deep and ice-cold, finally hit me. My initial outrage had burned itself out, leaving behind a terrible clarity. I had just attacked the most dangerous man in the city. Ava's future, my own future, perhaps even our lives, had just been irrevocably altered by my impulsive act. A wave of nausea washed over me and my knees felt weak, like they might buckle. But then, beneath the terror, a strange, exhilarating current began to flow. A wild, defiant thrill. I had done it. I had stood up to him. I had made him feel something, even if it was just the sting of my hand. I met his gaze, my chin lifting instinctively, a stubborn, unyielding spark igniting deep inside me. "Finally," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. His eyes, still locked on mine, held an unnerving intensity, as if he were seeing me for the very first time. Someone real. His words, cryptic and chilling, made no sense, yet they resonated with a disturbing weight. Someone real. What did that even mean? I wanted to scream, to run, to rewind the last 5 minutes and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. I just stood there, my chest heaving, listening to the frantic drumbeat of my own pulse in my ears. The air was thick with unspoken threats, with a dangerous, unforeseen connection that had just been forged between us. The bodyguards, finally shaking off their stupor, moved, not towards me, not to retaliate, but to flank Lorenzo, their expressions grim. One of them spoke into a discreet mic tucked into his cuff, his voice a low murmur. Lorenzo, however, didn't avert his gaze from me, not even for a second. His eyes were like a physical force, pressing down, demanding. "Clean this up," he said, still looking at me, his voice carrying just enough to reach Frank, who was now practically cowering behind the bar. "Everything. And tell Miss Bianchi to be gone by morning." He turned his head then, the movement slow and deliberate, and finally released my gaze. He didn't say another word. He simply turned, his bodyguards moving in sync with him, and walked out of the daily grind, the chime of the door a soft, mocking farewell. The restaurant, which had been silent, suddenly erupted into a cacophony of hushed whispers and urgent movements. Frank was shouting, Ava was crying, and the few remaining customers were scrambling for the door, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. "Lily, what did you do?" Ava wailed, rushing over to me, her hands grabbing my arms. Her tears were hot against my skin. That was Lorenzo Rossi. He's going to... She couldn't finish the sentence, dissolved into fresh sobs. Frank, though, was less sympathetic. "Get out, Lily. Both of you! This place is compromised. I can't believe you." His face was mottled red, a mixture of fear and fury. He was right. There was no way I could stay. No way Ava could stay. My mind was a blur of fragmented thoughts. Someone real, the way he'd looked at me, not with anger, but with something unsettlingly like interest. The strange, unwelcome pull I'd felt, a flicker of awareness that he saw something in me, something beyond a simple waitress. It was terrifying, and yes, exhilarating in a twisted way. That defiance, that instinct to protect, had put me squarely in his sights. "Ava," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. I gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "We need to go. Now." We stumbled out of the daily grind into the cool night air, leaving behind the chaos and the lingering scent of burnt sugar. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, like something alive. Ava clung to me, sobbing quietly while I walked on autopilot. My senses heightened, every shadow seeming to hide a threat. We went back to our tiny apartment, the place feeling suddenly exposed, vulnerable. Ava immediately started packing a small bag, her movements frantic. "I have to leave, Lily," he said tonight. "I have to go." Her voice was laced with a desperate fear I'd never heard from her before. I watched her, a hollow ache growing in my chest. This was my fault. My reckless impulsiveness had driven her out, away from her life, her home. But what choice did I have? I couldn't let him do that to her. Not after everything. "Where will you go?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She had family in another state, a distant aunt she rarely spoke to. "It doesn't matter," she sniffled, pulling a faded hoodie from her dresser. "Anywhere but here. Anywhere but where he is." She paused, then looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate plea. "Please, Lily, you have to be careful. He's not like other people." I hugged her tight, the rough fabric of her hoodie scratching my cheek. "I know, I'll be fine, just go, and let me know when you get there." The words felt hollow, a lie to soothe her, and myself. Fine was the last thing I was. After Ava left, the apartment felt impossibly large, echoing with a silence that pressed down on me. I tried to clean, to distract myself, wiping down the already spotless countertops, running my hand over the rough weave of the sofa fabric. But my mind kept replaying the scene. The crack of my palm, the way Lorenzo Rossi's head had snapped back, the unnerving intensity in his eyes. Someone real. I showered, trying to wash away the lingering tension, the metallic scent of fear and anger. The hot water stung my still tender palm. When I got out, wrapped in my oldest, softest towel, the world outside my window seemed calmer, almost normal. A car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the dusty street. But inside me, a storm was brewing. My phone, which I'd left charging on my nightstand, buzzed. A text message. My heart gave a painful lurch. It wasn't Ava. The number was unfamiliar. I unlocked my screen, my fingers trembling slightly. The message was short, direct, and written in a formal, almost archaic style. Ms. Vance. Your presence is requested at the Rossi Estate, 1421 Belladonna Way, tomorrow at 7 p.m. sharp. We have Ava Bianchi's debt to discuss. Your prompt arrival will ensure Miss Bianchi's continued freedom. Failure to attend will, unfortunately, result in dire consequences for your friend. Do not be late. L.R. My breath hitched, a cold knot forming in my throat. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. He hadn't retaliated directly, not physically. He had found a more insidious way to ensnare me, using the one thing he knew I cared about most. Ava. He knew my weakness, and he was exploiting it, drawing me into his web, demanding my presence. There was no escape. Not if I wanted Ava to be truly free. I stared at the message, the words burning into my retinas, the chilling certainty settling in my bones. I had to go. I had no choice. The smell of burnt sugar and stale coffee clung to my uniform, a familiar comfort, and a constant reminder that another Saturday night shift at the daily grind was grinding to its close. My feet ached, a dull throb that had been building since lunchtime. But the tips Ava had handed me after her last table made it all worth it. Ava, my best friend, was clearing the last few glasses from the bar, her normally bright smile looking a little pinched tonight. Her debt to Lorenzo Rossi was a shadow stretching over both our lives, not just hers. Every extra shift I picked up, every dollar I squirreled away, it was all for her. My own dreams of a small, quiet life, where I could make my own choices and not feel like I was always scrambling, felt miles away. But Ava was family, and family came first. You okay? I asked, wiping down a sticky tabletop, the synthetic cleaner stinging my nostrils. The restaurant was emptying out, leaving behind a scattering of crumbs and forgotten napkins. Ava sighed, polishing a wine glass with a furious intensity. Just tired, Lily. Lorenzo sends a chilling message to Lily, requesting her presence at his estate to discuss Ava's debt, making it clear her refusal will have dire consequences for her friend, thus ensnaring Lily in his web. The old digital clock on my nightstand glowed 6:17 p.m., the red numbers stark against the fading light outside my window. My hands felt clammy, a nervous sweat prickling my palms as I stared at my reflection. What did one wear to meet a Mafia boss who held your best friend's future hostage? Definitely not my stained daily grind uniform. I'd settled on a simple dark blue dress. Nothing fancy, just a clean, modest cut that felt like a shield. It was the best I had, a thrift store find I usually saved for job interviews that never quite panned out. The rough fabric of the dress felt oddly comforting against my skin, a small anchor in the storm brewing inside me. The air in the apartment was still, heavy with the quiet absence of Ava. It smelled faintly of her lavender laundry detergent and the stale pizza we'd had last night. My mind kept replaying the message from LR, the formal, chilling words echoing in my head. Your prompt arrival will ensure Miss Bianchi's continued freedom. He knew exactly how to twist the knife, exactly where my weakness lay. This wasn't about Ava's debt anymore. This was about me. I pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail, trying to project an air of composure I definitely didn't feel. My reflection stared back, eyes wide and a little too bright. They held a stubborn defiance, though, a flicker of the fire that had made me slap him in the first place. That spark, though terrifying, was also the only thing keeping me from crumpling. I wasn't going to beg. Not really. I'd negotiate. I'd find a way to protect Ava without losing myself. Or at least I hoped I would. The thought was a thin, trembling wire, stretched taut across a chasm of fear. A sleek black car, silent as a shadow, pulled up exactly at 6:45 p.m. It was an SUV, tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like dark mirrors. My throat felt tight, a cold knot forming as I walked out of the building. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't fallen. The driver, a hulking man in a dark suit with a blank, unreadable face, simply opened the back door for me. He didn't speak, didn't even glance at me directly. Just a silent, imposing presence. Sliding into the plush leather seat felt like stepping into another world. The interior smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else, something metallic and clean, like polished steel. My fingers pressed against the smooth, cool leather of the seat, a stark contrast to the worn fabric of my own sofa. The car moved off seamlessly. No sudden jerks. No engine roar. Just a smooth glide through the city streets. I watched the familiar cityscape melt away, replaced by increasingly grander homes, then by winding, tree-lined roads that led to places I'd only ever seen in magazines. This wasn't just a rich neighborhood, it was an empire. The Rossi estate loomed into view, a monolithic structure of dark stone and gleaming glass, set against a backdrop of ancient, towering trees. It wasn't a mansion, it was a fortress, radiating power and an almost menacing opulence. High walls, topped with intricate ironwork, stretched endlessly. Security cameras, subtle but omnipresent, seemed to track our every move. The air outside felt colder, thinner, despite the faint warmth of the engine. A tremor ran down my spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was it. No turning back now. We passed through an imposing gate that slid open without a sound, then continued up a long, winding driveway flanked by perfectly manicured lawns. The silence inside the car was deafening, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to conjure that stubborn spark of defiance again. This wasn't just for Ava. It was for me, to prove I wasn't some pawn to be moved around. The SUV stopped in front of the massive oak doors of the estate. They were grand, imposing, a testament to old money and unyielding power. The driver opened my door, his expression still neutral, and I stepped out onto a gravel path that crunched softly under my worn heels. The night air was fresh here, carrying the faint, earthy smell of damp soil and distant pines, a small, grounding detail in an otherwise overwhelming environment. My dress, though clean, felt suddenly inadequate, cheap. As I stood there, feeling dwarfed by the sheer scale of the building, the immense doors swung inward, revealing a cavernous entry hall. It was a space designed to impress, to intimidate. Gleaming marble floors stretched out, reflecting the light from an enormous crystal chandelier that hung from a vaulted ceiling. The air inside was cool, dry, and carried the subtle, expensive scent of old wood polish and something herbal, like dried rosemary. 2 more men in suits stood guard inside, equally imposing, equally silent. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "This way, Miss Vance." A new voice, surprisingly gentle yet firm, broke the silence. A woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, stepped forward from the shadows. She had a severe, no-nonsense bob and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't smile. No one here smiled. I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere in my throat. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I followed her, the sound echoing ominously in the vast space. Every step felt like a march towards my fate. She led me through a maze of corridors, each one more ornate than the last, lined with heavy tapestries and dark, antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was beautiful, undeniably, but cold, impersonal. My fingers brushed against the rough texture of a silk wall covering as we passed. A small, desperate attempt to connect with something tangible. Finally, she stopped before a large carved wooden door. She didn't knock. She simply opened it, stepped aside, and gestured me in. "Mr. Rossi will see you now." I walked into a study, or perhaps a library. The room was immense, lined from floor to ceiling with shelves packed with leather-bound books. The rich, earthy scent of old paper and wood filled the air, a familiar comfort that momentarily eased the tension in my chest. A large ornate desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it, silhouetted against a tall window overlooking a moonlit garden, sat Lorenzo Rossi. He didn't look up immediately. He was signing a document. His head bent, the lamplight casting deep shadows on his sharp features. He looked different tonight. Less overtly predatory than he had in the daily grind, more contained. His suit was still impeccable, tailored perfectly, but he exuded a quiet, almost scholarly intensity, hunched over his work. He could have been any powerful executive, if you ignored the palpable aura of danger that clung to him like a second skin. My eyes lingered on the faint red mark still visible on his cheekbone, a ghostly reminder of my impulsive act. A tiny spark of satisfaction, quickly extinguished by a fresh wave of fear, flickered within me. After what felt like an eternity, he capped his pen with a precise click and finally raised his head. His eyes, the color of wet slate under the lamplight, met mine. There was no anger there, no outward hostility, just that unnerving analytical curiosity I remembered from the restaurant. He didn't smile, but a hint of something flickered in their depths, something that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. He gestured to one of the two plush, antique armchairs opposite his desk. "Ms. Vance, please sit." His voice was low, smooth, devoid of any discernible emotion. I walked over, my movements stiff, and sank into the armchair. The velvet upholstery was soft, luxurious, but offered no real comfort. The desk between us felt like a chasm, a tangible representation of the power imbalance. I laced my fingers together, pressing my thumbs into my knuckles, trying to appear calm. The air crackled, thick with unspoken words. "Tea? Coffee? Or perhaps something stronger?" he offered, his gaze still holding mine. It wasn't a hospitable offer, more like a test. He probably expected me to refuse, to maintain a defiant distance. "No, thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My throat felt scratchy, and I longed for a glass of water, but asking for it felt like weakness. He nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Direct. I appreciate that." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Let's be direct then. Ava Bianchi is free, her debt is paid. She is no longer bound by any obligation to me or my organization. You ensured that." A wave of relief, so potent it almost made my knees buckle, washed over me. Ava was truly free. My impulsive act, my fear, it had all been worth it. But then the other shoe dropped. I knew it would. "However," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "that freedom came at a cost, not to Ava but to you." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing me to fully grasp the implication. The scent of aged leather from the books was almost intoxicating, but it couldn't mask the growing dread. "You struck me, Ms. Vance," he said, touching his cheek again, a slow, deliberate gesture, an act of unprecedented defiance. Most would expect retribution, vengeance. My breath hitched. My heart gave a frantic flutter against my ribs. Here it came. "But I am not like most," he continued, a flicker of something unsettling in his eyes. "You showed me something I haven't seen in a very long time. Something real, a raw, uncalculated courage, a fierce loyalty." He leaned forward then, resting his forearms on the desk, his hands clasped loosely. "And that, Ms. Vance, is a rare commodity, a valuable one." My mind raced, trying to decipher his words, to understand where this was going. He wasn't angry, he was intrigued, and that was far more terrifying. "So, here is my proposal," he said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, yet edged with an undeniable authority. "Ava is free, completely. She can go anywhere, do anything. No one will touch her. No one will ever harm her, financially or otherwise, because of her past association with me. That, I swear." His gaze was unnervingly sincere, a strange sense of honor emanating from his words, contradicting the ruthless reputation that preceded him. "In return," he continued, "you will become my personal assistant. You will reside here at the estate. You will work for me directly and solely, for as long as I deem necessary. My jaw went slack. Personal assistant? Here, with him? The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but the terror was too profound. No, I finally managed to say, the word a small, defiant whisper against the quiet hum of the room. No, I can't. That's not a deal. That's captivity. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched his lips. Not a smile, but a hint of dark amusement. Captivity implies you have no choice. You do, Ms. Vance. You can refuse. You can walk out that door right now, but if you do, his voice hardened, losing its smooth edge, then Ava Bianchi's debt will be reactivated. With interest, and my word that she will be left alone will be rescinded. Completely. Her freedom, her safety, will be forfeit. The air was sucked out of my lungs. He had me. He knew it. And he watched my face, dissecting every flicker of emotion, every tremble of my resolve. He was offering me a choice, but it was no choice at all. It was a gilded cage disguised as a deal. You'd truly do that? I asked, my voice barely a croak. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was offering to protect Ava by making me his prisoner. It was twisted, manipulative, and absolutely brilliant in its cruelty. I always honor my promises, Ms. Vance, he said, his voice flat. Both good and bad, and I never forget an insult or a loyalty. You chose to protect her. Now, you choose how that protection continues. He leaned back again, observing me. Think carefully, Lily. You're clever. You're resourceful. You're real. I believe you understand the gravity of this situation. My name, spoken so casually, so intimately, by him, sent a strange jolt through me. It felt like a violation, a claim. My mind raced, weighing the impossible options. Ava's safety, her actual freedom, against my own. This wasn't just about me anymore. It hadn't been since that slap. I had to ensure her true, lasting freedom. That meant I had to stay. I had to enter the cage. What exactly does a personal assistant for Lorenzo Rossi entail? I asked, forcing the words out, trying to regain some semblance of control. My voice was a little shaky, but it was there. His lips curved again, a genuine, if still humorless, smile this time. Many things. Managing my schedule, organizing my affairs, perhaps even offering a fresh perspective on certain matters. You'll learn. And you'll reside here. Your needs will be met, of course. A suite of rooms, personal staff, anything you require, except for your freedom to leave. That, Lily, will be mine to grant. Mine to grant. A shiver went down my spine. The way he said it, the possessiveness in his tone, was chilling. But also, I hated myself for it. But there was a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible hum of something else in my blood, a dangerous excitement, the thrill of walking a tightrope over a very deep chasm. And when is this arrangement over? I pushed, my voice gaining a bit more strength. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. When I decide it is. Or, he added, a glint in his eyes that was almost mischievous, when you convince me otherwise. That was the loophole, the challenge, the tiny sliver of agency he was offering. It wasn't much, but it was enough to latch onto. A way out. If I was smart enough, strong enough to find it. Fine, I said, my chin lifting, meeting his gaze squarely. I'll do it. For Ava. But understand this, Mr. Rossi. I am not some meek little bird you can tame. I don't scare easily, and I won't break. His smile widened, a genuinely chilling sight. Oh, I know, Lily. That's precisely why I want you here. And please, call me Lorenzo. The formality of Lily still felt like a formality. Lorenzo. The name felt heavy on my tongue, unfamiliar. He stood then, moving around the desk with an effortless grace that belied his size. He stopped beside my chair, the scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of bergamot and something smoky, filling my senses. His hand, warm and firm, rested lightly on my shoulder. It was a proprietary touch, a physical claiming. I tensed, my muscles going rigid, but I didn't flinch away. I couldn't. Welcome to your new life, Lily, he said, his voice a low rumble close to my ear. It promises to be enlightening. He released my shoulder, and the absence of his touch felt strangely cold. He then instructed the silent woman who'd led me in, whose name I still didn't know, to show me to my quarters and ensure I had everything I needed. He didn't offer a tour, didn't explain my duties, just everything you need and you'll learn. It was a deliberate move, designed to keep me off balance, to emphasize his control. As I followed the woman out, the scent of old books and wood polish seemed to recede, replaced by the faint, lingering scent of Lorenzo's cologne. My suite of rooms was more like a small apartment. It had a bedroom, a sitting area, and a large, opulent bathroom. The sheets on the bed were crisp, cool silk, almost impossibly soft beneath my fingertips. The decor was elegant, muted, filled with dark wood and plush fabrics. It was far more luxurious than anything I'd ever experienced, yet it felt like a prison cell. I walked to the window, pulling aside the heavy velvet drapes. Outside, the vast estate garden stretched into the moonlit distance. No fence, no obvious barrier, just open space and then the distant high walls. It was an illusion of freedom, a carefully crafted deception. Dinner was served to me alone in my sitting room by a quiet maid. It was a formal affair. Silver cloches, multiple courses, exquisite food I barely tasted. The roasted chicken and delicate asparagus felt heavy in my mouth. My thoughts were a jumble, oscillating between relief for Ava and a simmering resentment for Lorenzo. He saw me as a challenge, a curiosity, a thing to be acquired and studied, and I was, for the moment, trapped. I knew I had to play his game, to watch, to learn, to find my own way out. The next few days were a blur of observation and carefully orchestrated tasks. Lorenzo didn't throw me into the deep end with sensitive information or dangerous dealings. Instead, he made me work in his study. He'd have me organize his vast collection of books, meticulously cataloging them, the heavy volumes smelling of leather and dust. Lily witnesses Lorenzo ruthlessly eliminate a threat to his operations, sickening her. Moments later, he instinctively shields her from a sudden, unrelated danger, leaving her reeling from the contradictory images of protector and predator, and her own unsettling reaction to his proximity. The personal assistant job wasn't exactly what I'd imagined, not that I'd had much time to imagine anything beyond the immediate terror. Lorenzo didn't have me fetching coffee or organizing his dry cleaning. Instead, my days at the estate mostly revolved around his study, a vast room that smelled perpetually of old books, and something faintly masculine, like worn leather. My first task was to meticulously catalog his absurdly large collection, running my fingers over dusty spines, alphabetizing titles, and noting publication dates. It was oddly soothing work, a quiet reprieve in a place that otherwise felt like a gilded cage. He rarely spoke to me during these times, preferring to work in silence at his massive mahogany desk, the soft click of his pen the only sound for hours. I'd catch glimpses of him through my peripheral vision, the intensity of his profile, the way his jaw would sometimes clench, the almost imperceptible frown line between his brows when he was focused. The constant pressure of his presence was a tangible thing, a low hum in the air, a scent of bergamot and something smoky that clung to the rich fabrics of the room. My meals were served in my suite, always exquisite, always alone. The staff, a retinue of silent, efficient individuals, moved like ghosts. I never saw Ava's face in the pages of the local paper, or heard any whispers of her reactivated debt. That was the constant cold comfort. Ava was safe, and that safety was tethered directly to my continued presence here, in this opulent, unsettling world. The silk sheets, the plush carpets, the quiet hum of the climate control. It was all designed to make me comfortable, to lull me into submission. It wasn't working. One afternoon, a thick folder landed on my table. It wasn't a cataloging project. My schedule for the upcoming week. Lorenzo's voice, startlingly close, cut through the quiet. I hadn't even heard him approach. My hand went cold, a tremor running down my arm. He stood beside me, smelling of freshly pressed linen and that ever-present cologne, his shadow falling over the open book on the table. I need you to cross-reference these appointments with ongoing projects, highlight any potential conflicts, provide solutions. He gave me a look that was less an instruction and more a challenge. My throat felt a little tight. It was a test, I knew, to see if I could be useful beyond just organizing his library, to see if I had the intelligence he'd glimpsed that night at the daily grind. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper filling my lungs. Okay, I said, my voice coming out a little breathless. I'll do my best. The work was actually engaging. It required focus, a methodical mind, and an understanding of logistics, skills I'd picked up from years of waitressing, juggling orders and tables, predicting rushes. The projects were complex, involving intricate financial dealings, land acquisitions, and terse reports on personnel management. I tried not to think about what personnel management often implied in his world. I concentrated on the practicalities, the numbers, the cold, hard facts. I found a few minor clashes, a double-booked meeting with a contact in the city, an overlapping travel schedule. My proposed solutions were simple, direct, logical. I typed them up, my fingers flying across the smooth keys of the expensive laptop he'd provided, its quiet whir a constant companion. When I presented the printout, he took it, his long fingers brushing mine for a brief, unsettling second. My skin tingled. He scanned my notes, his gaze intense, then looked up. "You moved my meeting with Mr. Dubois," he stated, his voice even, but with an underlying current that made my nerves hum. That was a delicate negotiation, a priority. My throat felt dry. I noticed the way the light from the window caught the subtle silver threads in his slicked-back hair. "Yes, I saw," I replied, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "But it conflicted with the asset appraisal in Monaco. That's a larger sum, and your presence is listed as critical for both." I paused, chewing on the inside of my lip. My thought was that Mr. Dubois' negotiation could be handled by an associate in your absence, with a clear mandate. The asset appraisal needs you there, especially with the current market volatility. The financial benefit is significantly higher. The air in the study felt suddenly thinner, charged. I braced myself for a cold dismissal, or worse, a flash of anger. Instead, a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a warm smile, but it wasn't predatory either, more like acknowledgement. "Intriguing," he murmured, his eyes lingering on mine. "Most would not have dared to prioritize or question." He paused, then nodded. "Execute the change, and send a message to Dubois. Tell him I regret the inconvenience, but that unforeseen. Developments require my personal attention elsewhere." That was the start of it. I found my footing, not as a defiant captive, but as a genuinely useful, if deeply uncomfortable addition to his world. Slowly, subtly, I started to insert my own small compass into his ruthless strategies. It wasn't always successful, and sometimes it was barely more than a suggestion, a nuance in the phrasing of a letter, a recommendation for a less aggressive approach to a minor dispute. I learned to choose my battles. Like the time he was contemplating a hostile takeover of a small, family-owned shipping company that owed him a minor sum, he saw it as leverage, a means to expand his logistical network. I saw it as destroying generations of hard work, innocent people losing their livelihoods. "It's not just about the numbers, Lorenzo," I ventured, leaning against the polished wood of his desk late one evening, the scent of expensive ink in the air. We were alone, the mansion quiet around us. "There's a goodwill factor," I continued, pressing my thumbs into my knuckles, trying to sound calm. "Public perception, even in your world, has value. A small investment in their existing operations, a loan, an alliance. It could net you loyalty, a reliable partner, rather than a forced acquisition that makes enemies and leaves a bitter taste." He listened, his gaze unreadable, the lamplight reflecting in his eyes, which weren't dark but the color of polished river stone. He didn't immediately dismiss it. He just stared at me, then back at the dossier, a thoughtful expression on his face. The next day he made a phone call, issuing terse instructions in Italian. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was definitive. Later I saw a new report. A strategic alliance had been formed. The shipping company was still family-owned, but now loyal to Rossi. It wasn't a full victory, not a moral triumph, but it was a step. A tiny crack in the impenetrable wall he'd built around his empire. A hint that he could, occasionally, be swayed by something other than pure, cold profit. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and something akin to a fragile hope. I started to see the man beneath the monster, or at least, the man beneath the persona he wore for the world. He was incredibly intelligent, his mind working at a furious pace I could barely keep up with. He was relentlessly driven, consumed by the demands of his empire. Sometimes, late at night, when the study was quiet and we were both working, I'd see a fleeting weariness in his eyes, a loneliness that resonated with my own quiet isolation. The air would sometimes carry the faintest whisper of sadness, like a draft through a grand, empty hall. It was disturbing, this growing empathy, this unwanted glimpse into his hidden vulnerabilities. Then the quiet hum of the estate began to shift. Small things at first, a car passing too slowly on the main road outside the gates, its engine a low thrum against the late afternoon quiet, a security camera glitching for a few seconds, a phone call that Lorenzo took in a hushed, intense tone, his voice rough around the edges, the scent of frustration almost palpable in the room. He became more watchful, his gaze sweeping the grounds with an almost predatory alertness. He'd spend more time in the security room, watching the monitors, his profile etched with a quiet tension. "We have unwelcome attention," he stated one evening, his voice flat as he dropped a newspaper on my desk. The headline was innocuous, a local business story, but his finger pointed to a small, almost invisible detail in the background of a photograph. A car, parked strategically, its license plate a blur. A rival faction? They've been probing. My heart gave a painful lurch. The air went cold, and a chill went down my spine. "Probing for what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I could hear the faint rustle of the paper under my shaking fingers. "Weakness. Opportunity," he said, his eyes the color of wet slate, fixed on mine. "And your presence here, it is a new variable, an unknown element. Some may see it as a vulnerability." A sudden, sharp understanding pierced through me. He wasn't just observing me. He was using me as a shield, or perhaps as bait. The thought was sickening. The next day, as I walked through the manicured rose gardens to clear my head, the scent of damp earth and budding roses filling the air, I heard a sharp crack in the distance. It sounded like a gunshot. My breath hitched in my throat. Every muscle in my body tensed. My head snapped up, searching the tree line, but saw nothing. The air suddenly crackled with a dangerous energy. Before I could even fully process what I'd heard, a strong hand gripped my arm, pulling me backwards with surprising force. It was Lorenzo. He'd appeared from nowhere, his face grim, his grip firm, almost bruising. He didn't say a word, just dragged me, half running, back towards the main house. What was that?" I stammered, my heart racing, the crisp air suddenly feeling thin in my lungs. "A warning shot," he ground out, his jaw tight. "They're escalating. They want my attention, and they think you're the way to get it." We burst into the study, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind us with a resounding thud. The scent of old books felt like a comfort in the chaos. He released my arm, turning to face me, his eyes blazing with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "From now on," he commanded, his voice raw, "you do not leave my sight. You will not step foot outside this house without an escort. And you will not, under any circumstances, ignore my instructions." His words were harsh, but beneath them, I detected a tremor of something else. A deep, almost desperate concern. He wasn't just giving orders. He was trying to protect me. The realization sent a confusing jolt through my chest. Days turned into a suffocating blur. I was confined to the house, always aware of his presence, or the presence of his men. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the scent of fear mingling with the usual expensive cologne. I moved through the lavish rooms like a ghost, the soft carpet muffling my steps, the hushed conversations of the staff like distant whispers. Lorenzo, too, was constantly on edge, his focus split between his operations and my safety. I'd see him pacing, taking urgent calls, his eyes scanning every window. He was under immense pressure, and I was the reason. My resentment for him began to fray around the edges, replaced by a strange, unwelcome sense of concern. He wasn't just a manipulator. He was a man shouldering an empire, constantly under threat. He was isolated, exposed, and now, because of me, even more so. I found myself watching him, my empathy overriding my hatred, seeing the deep lines of stress around his mouth, the way he would instinctively glance at me when a phone rang. I realized, with a sickening lurch, that I was starting to care about him. The thought was terrifying, illicit, and deeply confusing. One stormy evening, the rain lashing against the windows, A sudden power surge caused the lights in the study to flicker, then die. The room plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city through the tall windows. A collective gasp went through the room, a tremor rippling through the air. The faint electrical hum of the house died. My breath hitched. Just as I started to fumble for my phone, a hand, strong and warm, closed around my wrist. Lorenzo was suddenly beside me, pulling me close, shielding me with his body. I could feel the hard planes of his chest against my back, the solid wall of his presence. The scent of bergamot and rain, carried on the sudden chill from the window, filled my senses. The air crackled around us. My heart raced, a wild flutter against my ribs, not just from fear, but from the sudden intense proximity, the unexpected protection. "Stay still," he murmured, his voice low, a deep rumble against my ear. His breath ghosted over my temple, sending a shiver down my spine. The power came back on a moment later, the lights flickering to life, but he didn't release me immediately. We stood there, pressed together, the tension between us a palpable thing. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. He slowly turned, his grip still on my wrist, bringing me fully around to face him. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, searched mine. They held a raw intensity, a vulnerability I'd never seen before, stripped bare by the sudden danger. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough. My gaze drifted to his lips, slightly parted, then back to his eyes. My throat felt scratchy. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the subtle texture of his expensive suit against my dress. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The words felt like sandpaper. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. He was so close. I could feel the soft rasp of his breath against my cheek. My gaze dropped again, drawn to his mouth. My body felt suddenly heavy, rooted to the spot, but also strangely light, as if floating. Every single cell in my body was acutely aware of him. I wanted to lean in. I wanted to pull away. His thumb, warm and rough, stroked the skin of my wrist. Just a single soft touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight through me. I instinctively leaned closer, drawn by an undeniable force, a magnetic pull I couldn't fight. He mirrored my movement, his head tilting, his eyes never leaving mine. His gaze felt like a physical caress, tracing the curve of my lips. My heart went cold, and then burned with a fire that had nothing to do with anger. His face was inches from mine. I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his eyes, the slight stubble along his jawline. His scent, that intoxicating mix of bergamot, smoke, and something distinctly him, flooded my senses, clouding my judgment. He was going to kiss me. I knew it. Every instinct screamed danger, but a deeper, more primal part of me yearned for it, yearned for the illicit connection, for the release of all this pent-up tension. Just as his lips were about to meet mine, a sharp rap on the door broke the spell. We both froze, a collective intake of breath. He pulled back, slowly, his hand dropping from my wrist, breaking the electric contact. The abrupt absence of his touch felt like a sudden drop, leaving me reeling. His eyes, though, still held that intense, raw vulnerability. He cleared his throat, a low rumble, and ran a hand through his already perfectly styled hair. The moment was shattered, but its residue lingered, a charged, undeniable awareness between us. "Enter," he commanded, his voice returning to its usual, controlled cadence, though a slight tremor still softened its edge. One of his security men stepped in, a flash of concern in his eyes. "Apologies, Mr. Rossi. We found a cut wire to the main power conduit. It appears they wanted to test our backup systems and disrupt your communications." He then looked at me, a quick, assessing glance. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Understood. Increase perimeter patrols. Double the watch on Miss Vance's movements. No one comes within 50 feet of this house without authorization." The man nodded and left, leaving the door ajar, the faint sound of voices carrying down the hall. Lorenzo turned back to me. His expression shuddered once more. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the familiar controlled mask. "This is what I meant, Lily," he said, his voice quiet, serious. "They're circling, and they're not afraid to be creative," but the words felt hollow. The air still hummed with the ghost of the almost kiss, the knowledge of what had nearly happened. My blood still thrummed with a dangerous energy. A few days later, Lorenzo decided a change of pace was needed. He'd been working intensely, barely sleeping. The strain etched onto his face. The tension in the house was suffocating. Lily is brutally kidnapped by the rival faction, used as bait to lure Lorenzo into a deadly trap. Her last thought is not of her own life, but of the dangerous path Lorenzo will take to save her, and the irreversible consequences it will have for them both. The jarring jolt of the van hitting a pothole sent a fresh wave of pain through my throbbing head. My wrists, chafed raw, were bound tightly with coarse rope, and a rough gag bit into my mouth, leaving a metallic taste on my tongue. The air around me was cold and damp, smelling faintly of exhaust fumes and stale cigarettes. I was blindfolded, but the sheer blackness behind my eyelids felt heavier, more absolute than simple cloth. My heart raced, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, echoing the terrifying uncertainty of my situation. I tried to focus, to ground myself. The rough texture of the van's floor scraped against my cheek, and I could hear the muffled thrum of the engine, the distant sounds of city traffic fading into rural quiet. My captors, two burly men whose faces I'd barely glimpsed, hadn't spoken since throwing me into the vehicle. Their silence was more unnerving than any threat, suggesting a cold, professional ruthlessness. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in my gut, but beneath it, a defiant spark flickered. "Lily, you have to stay sharp." Thoughts of Lorenzo, unwelcome and yet oddly comforting, swam through the haze of pain. What would he do? The thought of his rage, cold and precise, was almost a physical presence in the claustrophobic space. He would come for me. I knew it. That almost kiss, the raw vulnerability in his eyes during the blackout, the sheer possessiveness in his voice. It had all solidified something between us, something dangerous and undeniable. He wouldn't let them win. He couldn't. Suddenly the van lurched violently, throwing me sideways against the cold metal wall. A crash, a shout, and the squeal of tires cut through the silence. My stomach dropped, lurching with the sudden deceleration. The back doors burst open, letting in a blinding rush of light and the sharp scent of gunpowder. Shouts, harsh and guttural, filled the air, a terrifying symphony of violence. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a battle. Hands, strong and purposeful, ripped the blindfold and gag from my face, tearing at my skin. My eyes, adjusting to the sudden light, stung. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the chaos. We were in some kind of abandoned warehouse, concrete, floors slick with standing water, rusted metal beams disappearing into the gloom. My captors were already engaged, firing at shadows, their faces contorted in furious concentration. But then I saw him. Lorenzo. He moved with a brutal, mesmerizing efficiency, a dark force against the muted light. He wasn't alone. His men were, a blur of coordinated violence, taking down my captors with swift, deadly precision. He wore a dark tactical vest over his usual tailored shirt, a stark contrast to the elegant suits I was used to, and a sidearm was holstered at his hip. The smell of burning gunpowder was acrid in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of fear and something else, his familiar, expensive cologne. His eyes, the color of a stormy winter sky, zeroed in on me across the chaotic space. For a split second, the violence around us seemed to melt away, and only his gaze existed. There was no cold amusement now, no veiled curiosity. Only a raw, desperate relief mixed with a terrifying, absolute fury. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and his lips were pressed into a thin white line. He was coming. He moved towards me, his gaze never leaving mine, weaving through the skirmish as if propelled by an invisible force. He dispatched a lingering threat with a single brutal strike, not even breaking his stride. The sheer speed and power of him were breathtaking, terrifying. He wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature unleashed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, erratic beat. He knelt before me, his hands going immediately to the ropes on my wrists. His fingers, strong and calloused, worked quickly, efficiently, slicing through the bonds with a small, sharp knife. The rough rope fell away, leaving angry red marks on my skin. His touch was firm, yet surprisingly gentle as he checked my arms, his gaze sweeping over the scrapes and bruises. "Lily," he breathed, his voice a low, guttural rumble, laced with an emotion so profound it stole my breath. "Are you hurt?" My throat felt thick. I shook my head, my eyes burning. "I'm okay," I croaked, the words scratchy. His hands cupped my face then, his thumb stroking gently along my cheekbones. His eyes, usually so guarded, were completely open, revealing a terrifying depth of fear and something else. A fierce, possessive love that resonated deep within me. The scent of his skin, mingled with the sharp tang of gunpowder, filled my senses, grounding me. "No," he said, his voice flat, but with a barely perceptible tremor. "You are not okay, but you will be." He didn't wait for a response. He simply scooped me into his arms, lifting me effortlessly as if I weighed nothing. I instinctively wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face against his shoulder. His suit jacket was damp, smelling of the warehouse and something uniquely him, that bergamot and smoky leather. The hard planes of his chest offered a surprising comfort. He carried me out of the immediate danger zone, his men forming a protective wall around us. The sounds of the fight slowly faded as we moved towards a waiting black SUV. The vehicle was sleek, polished, and contrasted sharply with the gritty, ruined landscape of the warehouse. Sliding into the plush leather interior felt like falling into a cloud. I was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline and the lingering terror. Lorenzo sat beside me, pulling me closer, his arm a solid, reassuring weight around my shoulders. He didn't speak, just held me, his chin resting lightly on my hair. I could feel the subtle vibrations of his chest, the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was a silent comfort, a profound declaration in itself. The world outside the tinted windows was a blur of motion, but inside, wrapped in his arms, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Back at the estate, the atmosphere was one of grim, controlled efficiency. We were rushed inside, not through the grand front doors, but a discreet side entrance. The air inside smelled of beeswax and expensive flowers, a stark contrast to the industrial stench of the warehouse. A small medical team, already assembled, immediately began to check me over in a private, sterile room. Lorenzo never left my side, his presence a constant anchor. He watched the doctor and nurses with an intense, almost predatory vigilance, his jaw still tight, his eyes like polished river stones. He asked questions in a low, precise voice, demanding thoroughness, his concern palpable. When they cleaned the cuts on my wrists, I winced, and his hand immediately went to my arm, his thumb stroking gently. It wasn't the powerful boss I saw, but a man profoundly shaken, fiercely protective, later, wrapped in a plush robe in my suite, sipping hot tea that tasted faintly of ginger. I finally had a moment to process everything. The crisp, clean scent of the tea was a small comfort. Lorenzo sat opposite me, his expression still etched with a barely contained fury. He had changed into a fresh suit, but the dark intensity in his eyes remained. He looked exhausted, the faint lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual. "They underestimated me," he stated, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual silky control, a raw edge to it. "They thought by taking you they could weaken me, make me vulnerable. his fist clenched, resting on his knee. They made a grave mistake. The air in the room seemed to crackle around him, thick with his suppressed rage. I could still smell the faint, lingering scent of gunpowder on him. "What will you do?" I asked, my voice still a little shaky but gaining strength. My fingers tightened around the warm teacup. He looked at me, his gaze unwavering, and for a long moment he didn't speak. He seemed to be weighing his words, or perhaps grappling with the emotions churning beneath his stoic exterior. "I will dismantle them," he finally said, his voice low and deadly serious. "Every last one. They will regret the day they thought to touch what is mine." The word, mine, resonated deep within me, possessive and absolute. It should have frightened me, and a part of me did recoil. But another part, the part that had witnessed his unwavering devotion, his brutal efficiency in protecting me, found a strange, dark comfort in it. He saw me as his, and he would move heaven and earth to protect his. Over the next few days, I saw the full, terrifying extent of Lorenzo's power. He orchestrated a rapid, decisive strike against the rival faction. The estate became a hub of intense activity, phone calls made in hushed, urgent tones, men coming and going with grim determination. I heard snippets of conversations, words like asset forfeiture, territory acquisition, elimination. It was brutal, ruthless, and absolute. But I also saw the subtle shift. When one of his lieutenants suggested a retaliatory move against the rival's family members, a cruel standard practice in his world, Lorenzo's eyes, usually so cold, hardened with a different kind of fury. "No," he commanded, his voice sharp, ringing with a new, unexpected authority. "We do not touch families. We target leadership, operations, assets, those who chose this life." I recognized my own words in his command, the subtle seeds of goodwill and integrity I had planted during our late-night talks in the study. He hadn't just rescued me. He had listened to me. He was enacting my influence, making a public, strategic shift in his operational style. It wasn't a sudden conversion, but a calculated pivot, a new standard born of my presence. It was still dark, still ruthless, but it carried a faint, unsettling echo of my own moral compass. It was a brutal form of justice, but it wasn't senseless destruction. The rival faction was completely dismantled within a week, their leadership neutralized, their operations absorbed or eradicated. The threat was gone. The silence that fell over the estate after the storm was different from before. It wasn't just quiet. It was secure. I walked through the gardens again, the scent of fresh-cut grass and damp earth filling the air, and this time, there was no tremor in my step. That evening, Lorenzo came to my suite. The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows around the room, making the familiar space feel intimate, charged. He stood in the doorway, framed by the dark wood, his shoulders broader, his posture subtly changed. He looked less burdened, less consumed by the immediate threat, but still carried a weight, a quiet intensity. He hadn't said much to me since the rescue, only checking on my well-being. But tonight, there was a different look in his eyes. "May I come in, Lily?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost hesitant. He wasn't demanding. He was asking permission. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry, my heart doing a strange flutter. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't approach immediately, instead walking to the large window, looking out at the moonlit gardens, his hands clasped behind his back. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, with the lingering scent of old wood polish and the subtle, tantalizing hint of his cologne. I watched him, my breath catching in my chest. This wasn't the ruthless boss, not entirely. This was the man who had trembled with fear when he thought I was harmed. This was the man who had subtly shifted his empire for me. He turned slowly, his gaze finding mine across the room. His eyes, the color of storm clouds clearing after a long rain, were soft, open, almost vulnerable. "When they took you," he began, his voice low, raw, I thought I would break." He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands, then back to my face. "I've never felt fear like that, Lily. Not for myself. Not for anything I own or my empire. Only for you. My heart gave a painful lurch. To hear him admit such a profound vulnerability, to confess such a depth of emotion, was breathtaking. It was a chasm opening up, revealing the fiercely guarded heart I'd only glimpsed. I realized in those hours that my world, the one I had built, was empty without you in it. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood just inches from me. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the sheer force of his presence. I need you, Lily, he confessed, his voice a whisper, filled with an aching sincerity. Not as an assistant, not as a trophy, but as my equal, as my partner. You make me better. You temper the darkness. You make me real. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently cupped my cheek. His touch was feather light, yet it sent a jolt of electricity straight through me. The rough texture of his skin against mine was exquisite. My gaze drifted to his lips, slightly parted, then back to his eyes, which held a pleading intensity. All the fear, all the resentment I had harbored, slowly dissipated, replaced by a fierce, undeniable love. This wasn't a simple love story. It was dark, complex, born of danger and power, but it was real, and it was ours. I know your world, Lorenzo, I said, my voice barely audible, but firm. It's brutal. It's dangerous, and I don't pretend it's not. But I've seen you in it. I've seen the man beneath the monster. The man who risks everything for those he cares about. The man who listens. My thumb instinctively stroked the back of his hand. And I think I love you too. A profound relief washed over his face, softening the harsh lines of his jaw. His eyes, those incredible storm clouds, shone with an emotion I couldn't quite name. A desperate hope, a raw joy. Lily, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, and then he leaned in, slowly, deliberately. I mirrored his movement, my eyes fluttering shut, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. His lips met mine, soft at first, a hesitant feather-light touch, testing the waters. Then, as I leaned in fully, deepening the kiss, his arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his hard, muscular body. The scent of him, that intoxicating blend of bergamot and smoke and something uniquely male, filled my senses, making my head spin. His mouth was warm, firm, demanding, and utterly intoxicating. It wasn't just physical. It was a joining of souls, a declaration whispered on the deepest level. My hands went to his hair, clutching at the slick, soft strands at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. His groan rumbled deep in his chest, vibrating through me. Every touch, every sensation was heightened, amplified. The world outside the room, the world of danger and power, ceased to exist. There was only us, this moment, this profound, illicit connection. He broke the kiss slowly, reluctantly, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine. His eyes, still shining with a raw vulnerability, searched mine. You are not just choosing me, Lily, he murmured, his voice husky. You are choosing this life. You are choosing the darkness. Are you certain? His touch, though gentle, was a physical question, a final offer of an escape route. I looked into his eyes, seeing the fear there, the profound loneliness he had carried for so long. I felt the rough texture of his suit jacket under my hands, the steady beat of his heart against my own. I wasn't naive. I knew what this meant. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe, but it would be real. I am certain, I whispered, my voice firm, unwavering. I choose you, Lorenzo, and I choose to find my light within your darkness. Together. A genuine smile, slow and incredibly beautiful, spread across his face, reaching his eyes, banishing the shadows that had always lurked there. He picked me up again, effortlessly, carrying me towards the bed. The silk sheets, cool and luxurious, rustled as he gently laid me down. He followed, his weight a welcome press against me, and our intimate union was a silent, powerful testament to the emotional bond we had forged, a fusion of souls and bodies, the ultimate act of trust and acceptance in our shared, complicated world. The air was thick with our joined breaths, with the new, undeniable promise of our future. Weeks melted into months. The estate transformed subtly. My presence wasn't just tolerated. It was integrated. I continued to work alongside Lorenzo in the study, my suggestions now openly considered, my insights valued. I found myself navigating the complex politics of his empire with a newfound confidence, always grounded by my moral compass, always pushing for a smarter, more enduring path. The staff, initially wary, now treated me with a quiet respect. My morning walks in the garden were no longer accompanied by unspoken tension, but by the scent of blooming roses and a quiet sense of belonging. Lorenzo's men still guarded me fiercely, but it felt less like captivity and more like protection, a visible sign of his unwavering commitment. One crisp autumn morning, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the study, Lorenzo and I stood side by side, overlooking the sprawling gardens. The air carried the faint, earthy scent of fallen leaves and the distant chirping of birds. He wore a charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, and my hand rested lightly on his arm, the soft wool warm beneath my fingers. He wasn't working, not today. He was simply watching the world, his expression serene. He turned to me then, his eyes, the color of wet slate warmed by the morning sun, soft and completely open. There was no mask, no pretense, just the man, vulnerable and whole. He reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Lily," he said, his voice a low rumble, filled with an emotion that made my heart ache. "Do you remember the first night at the daily grind?" I smiled, a genuine soft smile that reached my eyes. "How could I forget? You were infuriating, and I slapped you," he chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "You did, and in that moment when your defiance blazed in your eyes, I thought, finally, someone real." His gaze held mine, intense and possessive, but filled with an overwhelming tenderness. "You saw me, Lily. You truly saw me beyond the empire, beyond the monster they wanted me to be. And you didn't run. You stayed. You chose to be here." He intertwined his fingers with mine, squeezing gently. "This is your home now, Lily. This is our empire. And you," he murmured, his voice thick with devotion, "are my queen. My partner in everything, my light in the darkness." The words, so freely given, so utterly sincere, filled the vast study, echoing with a promise that felt as ancient and unshakable as the stone walls themselves. The scent of old books and his familiar cologne enveloped me. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. The warmth of his hand, clasped in mine, was a constant reassurance. I was not a prisoner here, not anymore. I was a choice. I had found my love, undeniable and fierce, in the heart of a man I once feared, and in doing so, I had found my own power, my own agency, not by escaping the darkness, but by standing beside him, illuminating it, knowing that by his side I was truly, finally, free.